Dr. Peter Fenwick is the internationally renowned expert on death-related phenomenon, or I guess we say phenomena, because there are many of them. They're the experiences of the dying. There are the experiences of the grieving that are watching the dying, and those that are survived the death and how they are coping with their loss and the visions they have. Are they hallucinations? Could it be that this near-death experience opens up, I don't know, some sort of portal? And how do we explain the consistency of these experiences? And what are the inconsistencies of these invisible visitors that come into the deathbed room of those that are passing on? What do we make of that the visitations are different in India, say, than they are in the United States? And then what about those grandfather clock stories we've heard so much about? Is it just a good legend, or are there verifiable versions of that story over the years that have been collected by doctors much like Peter Fenwick, people who are scientists at heart, but are also believers or want to be based on what they see? And how do they reconcile those two things? We'll talk about it all night long. The book is The Art of Dying, and you'll want to get in on this discussion. We'll go to the lines early because I know that so many people out there have had these experiences, the visions that have come in dreams, or maybe even in a waking state when somebody who love has died has come back to comfort you, maybe laid down next to you in bed. Other things that you would, if it were coming from anybody other than a doctor or a neuropsychiatrist, you might say, oh, come on. But you just might have to change that opinion based on what you'll hear next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Well, I don't know where to start other than to say thank you, Dr. Peter Fenwick. And I know your wife co-wrote this book with you, but I assume that most of the research on this comes from your own experience as a doctor and the people you're working with. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. Good evening. It's good morning here in London.
Yeah,
yes. Being a scientist, what I did was we did a number of research projects. We looked at palliative care teams. We went into hospices and talked to the carers, and also into nursing home. And so a lot of our data came from the carers of the dying. And so we feel that our data is good because it relates directly to those who are in touch with the dying as they die.
Well, I love that. I love that about your book too, because you verify and you have names and places and dates, and it really it gives a level of credibility to the experience that's higher than, say, I heard this from somebody who saw it on the internet.
I'm pleased about that because being a scientist myself, I like to try and get the data correct and then follow the data. So we try to keep any belief out of the book and just look at what the dying say. If you want to know what dying is like, ask the dying. And so that's exactly what we did.
Let's just establish, too, what a neuropsychiatrist does. I think I know, but explain it then, just to make sure that we know exactly what your expertise is.
I've been trained in, first of all, psychiatry. I'm a medical doctor, and so I went through the standard medical training. But I've always been interested in consciousness and also in the wider mental states that people have. For example, mystical transcendent experiences, near-death experiences, and much more recently, what happens when we die. And because I'm a neuropsychiatrist, I'm trained also in neurology and brain function. And I've spent a lot of my life researching into consciousness and how the brain works. So I'm doubly qualified, if you like.
Yeah. Well, and you're way overqualified to be on this show. I just want you to know. So, and I am the dumbest guy I know. So I will try to understand what you're talking about. If I run into a problem, I'll slow you down. But I think what I liked so much about when I read the book, and I read almost all of the book, is that you start with something that's anecdotal, but then you show a pattern in the anecdote. So let me ask you up front: at what point do anecdotes become data, where you collect something that becomes sort of establishes a theme?
I think anecdotes are the raw beginnings of science. In other words, you notice something, and then when you look at it, you find a pattern, and then you set up your hypotheses to try and explain the pattern. So in order to look at what happens as we die, we had to get a lot of accounts, and we were enormously lucky in that I went on a television show in the UK, and from that we got nearly 1,000 accounts, 700 from television and about 300 from a newspaper article. So we had a lot of accounts in which we could start looking at anecdotes and then finding the patterns.
And these were people who personally experienced something as opposed to a family legend.
That's absolutely right. If it was a family legend, it went into one of the chapters in the book which deal more with legends.
Right.
No, these were real experiences. You're sitting with your mum or your dad as they're dying, and then they describe exactly what happened.
Well, and so let's start there, because in a way we could kind of divide this up into three categories: the experiences of the dying before death, the experiences of the bereaved during the process before and after death, and then the experiences of a kind of witnesses and of other professionals who are kind of going along with the family and what they see in this. There may be even more than that, but that's kind of where I was going with this. So let's start with the first group, the people who are dying, and the consistency amongst those people who are passing in having these visitations, seeing visitors or having visions about something that's happening in the room that nobody else can see.
Yes. That I think is an excellent place to start, because it was in fact a British doctor, Lady Barrett, who was an obstetrician, and she was at the birth of a woman, and unfortunately the woman was dying from a hemorrhage, although the child was all right. And as she died, she began to see visions, and what she said is she looked eagerly towards a part of the room, and the radiant smile illuminating her whole countenance. "Oh, lovely, lovely," she said. When asked what it was she saw, she replied, "Lovely brightness, wonderful beings." A moment later, she exclaimed, "Why, it's Father. Oh, he's so glad I'm coming. He's so glad. It would be perfect if only my husband could come too." And then the important point of her experience was the patient then cried out, "Oh, he's so near. He has Vida with him. Vida is with him." Now, that was a remarkable thing, because Vida was, in fact, her sister, and she didn't know that her sister had died. And, in fact, the vision was of both her father and her sister. The sister had recently died, and that started Sir William Barrett on his search for more of these visions. And that was really what started it in this country, because he then published a book on it.
Right.
Now, the visions are very clear, and from our accounts, we find that they occur usually in the last 2 weeks of life. The person will report that a dead parent, or a dead brother or sister, very occasionally a dead friend, will come to talk to them. The dying are very pleased with this, and they greet the people. The visitor will probably just make one or two appearances to begin with, and then they come closer and closer as dying approaches. And usually before you die, in the days before you die, they'll actually sit on your bed and many people die holding their hands out or trying to get out of bed to go with their visitors.